When it comes to salary negotiation, most people walk into the room thinking it's a battle, a test of who wins and who loses. But let me tell you something: a salary negotiation isn't about fighting. It's about positioning. And the biggest mistakes people make come from forgetting that. So let's talk about what not to do, because sometimes avoiding the wrong moves is more powerful than making the right ones. Don't start talking about money too soon. The moment you lead with numbers, you've already given up your leverage. Why? Because once the topic of money is on the table, the focus shifts from your value to their budget. Instead, start with what you bring, your expertise, your results, your impact. Make them see your worth before they hear your price. People don't pay for effort. They pay for perceived value. Don't apologize for asking. So many people say, "I'm sorry, but I was hoping for a little more." Why are you sorry for wanting to be compensated fairly? Apologies communicate doubt, and doubt invites negotiation downward. Stand firm, be respectful, but don't shrink. Confidence doesn't mean arrogance. It means you know what you bring to the table. Don't talk too much. The more you explain, the less power you hold. You make your point, state your number, and then stop talking. Silence is uncomfortable, and that's exactly why it's powerful. Let them respond. Let them think. If you can't handle silence, you'll talk yourself out of the raise you deserve. Don't make it personal. This is not about your bills, your rent, or how hard your life is. It's about business. Keep your emotions out of it. When you make it personal, you lose credibility. When you make it professional, you gain respect. Don't underestimate your preparation. If you walk in without research, you walk in blind. Know the industry standards. Know your company structure. Know exactly why you deserve that number, and be ready to back it up with data and achievements. Preparation is power disguised as calm. Here's the truth. Negotiation is not about being aggressive. It's about being strategic. It's not about demanding more. It's about demonstrating more. When you walk in prepared, composed, and clear on your value, you don't have to chase respect. It meets you there. So next time you sit at that table, remember, don't rush, don't apologize, don't talk too much, don't make it personal. And above all, don't forget who you are and what you've earned, because when you know your worth, you don't negotiate from fear, you negotiate from power. When it comes to negotiation, especially when discussing your salary, the biggest mistake people make is starting with the number. They walk into the room thinking that if they just name their price boldly or justify every dollar, they'll win. But that's not how influence works. The moment you lead with money, you shift the focus away from you and toward the budget. The conversation stops being about your contribution, your value, and your results, and becomes about what the company can afford. And when you do that, you lose leverage before the discussion even begins. The truth is, people don't buy numbers. They buy stories, they buy confidence, they buy results. When you walk in and immediately start talking about salary, you turn the entire conversation into a transaction. But when you start with value, you turn it into an investment, and that's what a negotiation should be. You're not asking for a favor. You're offering an opportunity for them to invest in someone who brings measurable results. Think about it this way. If you were trying to sell a car, would you begin the conversation by saying, "It costs 40,000? Of course not. You'd first talk about what makes the car worth that price. The engine, the design, the performance, the reliability. You'd create the of why before you drop the how much. Salary negotiation is no different. The value you project sets the tone for how people perceive your worth. The number only makes sense once the value is established. When you lead with value, you are telling a story about who you are and what you deliver, you shift from being just another employee to being an asset. You're saying, here's how I've helped the company grow, or here's what I achieved in my last role that saved time, increased efficiency, or brought in revenue. You make the other side see that paying you more isn't a cost. It's a smart business move. There's also psychology behind this. When people hear a number first, they subconsciously anchor to it. If that number is higher than what they expected, they immediately go on defense. Their brain starts calculating how to bring it down. But if you start with your value, you prime their perception. You're shaping their mental framework before money even enters the discussion. By the time you bring up your desired salary, it fits naturally with the image you've built. It feels justified. It feels earned. Another reason not to lead with money is that it makes you seem impatient. It signals that your motivation is transactional, that you're there for the paycheck, not the purpose. Employers notice that. They read tone, body language, and intent. If you open with, "What's the salary range?" or "I need at least this much," you show that your focus is on what you get rather than what you give. When you focus first on what you offer, your skills, leadership, initiative, problem solving, you come across as someone who understands value exchange. You become someone people want to invest in. The best negotiators use timing as a weapon. They don't rush to mention numbers. They build the stage carefully. They use their words, posture, and confidence to shape the perception of their worth. And when they finally bring up compensation, it's not a demand. It's the logical conclusion of everything they've demonstrated. That's how you earn respect and better outcomes. People often confuse confidence with confrontation. They think if they don't bring up the number first, they're being weak or submissive. But in truth, patience is power. The longer you keep the conversation focused on your performance, achievements, and the value you bring, the more control you have. You're guiding the conversation, not reacting to it. You're showing emotional intelligence, the ability to read the room, influence perception, and lead the dialogue without seeming pushy. You can't control how much a company budgets for a role, but you can absolutely control how they perceive your worth within that range. You do that by clearly articulating your results. Don't just say, "I'm good at communication." Say, "I streamlined internal communications between departments and reduced project delays by 25%. Don't just say, "I'm a strong team player." Say, "I led a cross-functional team that delivered a project 2 weeks ahead of schedule." Numbers, results, and outcomes are your leverage, not your salary demand. Another common mistake people make is assuming that if they don't bring up money early, they'll be undervalued. But strong negotiators know that silence on the number isn't weakness, it's strategy. It gives you space to first frame the value proposition. Once they see what you bring to the table, they're more inclined to offer a figure that matches that image. And if their offer comes short, you have a strong foundation to justify a higher number without sounding defensive. Leading with value also changes your internal mindset. When you focus on what you deserve, you're in a position of asking. When you focus on what you deliver, you're in a position of power. That's a huge psychological shift. It makes you more composed, more persuasive, and more in control of the room. You stop trying to prove your worth and start showing it. There's another layer, the emotional intelligence behind timing. Every negotiation has an energy flow. When you lead with money, you spike the tension early. When you lead with value, you build rapport, respect, and mutual interest before introducing the sensitive part of the discussion. That's when your request lands with impact rather than friction. You want the other person to want to pay you more, not because you asked, but because they recognize your contribution. That recognition starts with how you frame your story. It's about positioning your achievements in a way that highlights their benefit, not just your effort. Companies reward outcomes, not activities. The more clearly you connect your work to tangible results, the stronger your position becomes. So before you walk into any salary discussion, prepare your narrative. Gather proof of what you've achieved, quantify it where possible, and practice delivering it with calm authority. Let them see that you're not just another candidate or employee. You're a solution, a performer, and an asset. The goal isn't to convince them to pay you more. It's to make them realize they can't afford not to. That's why the first rule in any salary negotiation is this: never lead with the number. Lead with your value. The number will follow. Silence and confidence speak louder than explanations. Most people don't realize how much power there is in saying less, especially in a negotiation. When you're discussing your salary, your instinct is to fill every pause, to justify every request, to make sure the other person completely understands why you're asking for what you want. But that instinct is exactly what weakens your position. Every extra word, every nervous explanation, every attempt to over clarify tells the other side something you don't intend to say, that you're not entirely sure of your own value. True confidence doesn't need noise. It's calm, measured, and deliberate. It lets silence do the work for you. When you state your desired salary or your expectation, stop talking. Let the silence settle. It may feel uncomfortable at first because human beings naturally want to fill space. Silence creates tension, and tension demands release. But if you can master that tension, if you can sit in it without flinching, you show strength. The person across the table feels it too. They sense composure, certainty, authority. They may even begin to talk more, revealing information or justifying their position, which often gives you leverage. In any negotiation, the person who talks the most usually loses control. They give away too much information. They reveal their fears, their flexibility, their limits. They try to convince the other side when in truth, people aren't convinced by words. They're convinced by presence. The moment you over-explain, you shift the power dynamic. You become reactive. But when you stay quiet, when you project calm confidence, you hold the frame, you set the rhythm of the conversation, and the other person adjusts to you. Confidence is not loud, it's steady. You can sense it in the way someone looks at you, the way they pause before they speak, the way they're not afraid to wait. When you combine that stillness with direct, simple language, you become far more persuasive. You don't need to justify your number with 10 different reasons. One clear statement, backed by your tone and posture, is often enough. Because at that moment, you're not just communicating a figure, you're communicating self-worth. Psychologically, silence triggers curiosity. When you stop talking after making a statement, the other person's mind starts filling in the blanks. They start thinking, analyzing, wondering if you know something they don't. It subtly shifts the power balance. Instead of you seeking their approval, they start seeking your reasoning. You become the authority in the room without having to assert it. That's why experienced negotiators use silence like a tool. It's not passive, it's strategic. Over-explaining, on the other hand, comes from a place of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of rejection, fear of losing the opportunity. You might think you're showing transparency or passion, but often what you're showing is insecurity. When you rush to fill the silence with words like, I just think, I hope, or maybe, you weaken your statement before it has a chance to land. Those little qualifiers are verbal cracks that reveal hesitation. The strongest communicators eliminate them. They replace them with clarity, certainty, and restraint. Think about the last time someone gave you a confident answer. They didn't talk in circles. They didn't justify. They spoke once, directly, and left the words hanging. That's what you remember. Silence gives weight to what's been said. It forces people to pay attention. When you keep talking, you dilute the impact. You turn something sharp and precise into something soft and forgettable. In a salary negotiation, your goal isn't to fill space. It's to make your words count. Confidence also isn't about arrogance. It's about alignment. It's when what you say, how you say it, and how you carry yourself all match. You can't fake it for long because real confidence is rooted in preparation. When you know your value, when you've done your research and have evidence of your performance, you don't need to overcompensate with words. You can afford to be silent because you know your facts speak for themselves. Preparation breeds calm. Calm breeds confidence, and confidence commands respect. There's another layer to this: emotional control. During negotiation, emotions can easily hijack logic. Maybe you feel nervous. Maybe you fear rejection. Maybe you want to prove that you're worth more. But confidence isn't about never feeling those things. It's about managing them. It's the discipline to stay composed even when your pulse is racing. Silence helps with that. It gives you space to think, to breathe, to keep your emotions in check while the other person reacts. In psychology, there's something called the power of pause. It's used in interrogation, leadership, and high-stakes communication. When you pause intentionally, you control tempo. You make others lean in. It creates a subtle authority dynamic. You are the one dictating the rhythm, and rhythm matters in persuasion. People trust those who seem grounded and unshaken. They follow those who seem in control of their energy. That's why silence isn't emptiness, it's presence. It communicates that you are centered, confident, and sure of your worth. When you stay silent after stating your number, you also avoid negotiating against yourself. Many people make this mistake. They say, I'm looking for around 80 zalozen. And then seconds later, they add, but I'm flexible if that's too high. That one sentence just cost them thousands of dollars. They undermined their own position because they couldn't sit in the silence. If you simply say the number and stop, the ball stays in the other person's court. They must respond, and often they'll respond better than you expected. Silence gives you control of the conversation's pace. The person who rushes to fill the gaps shows impatience. The person who waits shows command. It's like in chess, sometimes the strongest move is not to move yet. You wait for your opponent to reveal their position before deciding your next step. Negotiation follows the same principle. When you remain composed and quiet, you get to see their reactions, their hesitations, their micro expressions. You read the room before making your next play. And there's another truth. Silence is not just about not talking. It's about how you hold that silence. Your body language must align with it. If you're silent but fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, or shrinking into your chair, your silence communicates insecurity. But if you're silent and sitting tall, maintaining steady eye contact, relaxed but firm, your silence communicates confidence. The difference lies in presence. People feel it even before they process it. Confidence doesn't come from convincing others. It comes from convincing yourself. When you truly believe in your worth, you don't rush to prove it. You know what you bring. You know your results. You know your impact. That inner certainty radiates through your voice, your pauses, your stillness. It's magnetic. And that magnetism is what influences decisions more than any explanation ever could. Every word you say should have purpose. Every silence should have weight. That's how powerful communication works. When you stop trying to fill space with justification, you start owning the space you occupy. You don't need to dominate the conversation. You just need to anchor it. In a world full of noise, calm confidence stands out. The quietest person in the room often has the most control, not because they talk more, but because they understand when to stop talking. Keep it professional. Emotion kills negotiation power. One of the most common reasons people fail in salary negotiations isn't because they're underqualified or underprepared. It's because they let their emotions take control. When your emotions walk into that room before your logic does, you lose balance. You start reacting instead of responding, defending instead of presenting, and pleasing instead of negotiating. Negotiation is a psychological game as much as it is a professional discussion. The person who stays calm holds the power. The person who gets emotional gives it away. When emotions enter the room, the energy shifts. If you walk in frustrated, nervous, or desperate, that energy leaks through your tone, your body language, and even the way you phrase your words. You might not say, "I'm anxious," but your behavior says it for you. Maybe you speak too fast. Maybe your voice cracks. Maybe you over-justify your value because deep down, you're seeking validation. Those subtle cues tell the other side that you're negotiating from a place of need, not strength. And once they sense that, the negotiation stops being balanced. Professionalism means emotional discipline. It's the ability to separate what you feel from what you need to communicate. It doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you don't let them drive your decisions. There's a difference between passion and emotion. Passion fuels confidence. Emotion clouds it. Passion says, "I'm proud of what I've achieved." Emotion says, "I need you to approve what I've achieved." One is power. The other is dependency. Many people walk into salary discussions with a personal narrative running in their mind. Their struggles, their long hours, their financial pressures, their frustrations. But the truth is, the person across the table isn't negotiating with your story. They're negotiating with your results. Bringing your emotions into that space turns a professional discussion into a personal plea. When you say things like, "I've worked so hard for this company," or "I really need this raise," you're appealing to sympathy, not strategy. Sympathy might win you a small favor, but it will never win you lasting respect. A negotiation is a performance of composure. The best negotiators are the ones who seem calm even when everything is on the line. They don't raise their voices. They don't oversmile. And they don't let frustration leak out. They stay steady because steadiness projects control. People naturally trust those who appear emotionally stable. Emotional stability signals reliability, leadership, and self-awareness, traits every employer values. If you can remain professional when stakes are high, it proves you can handle pressure when challenges arise. Keeping emotion out doesn't mean you act like a robot. It means you control the narrative of your tone and timing. Your tone should be measured, confident, and grounded. You should speak as if you already believe the outcome will work in your favor, not as if you're hoping it will. Your timing matters too. Emotional people rush responses. Professionals pause. They listen, absorb, and then respond thoughtfully. That pause is where the power lies. It shows that you're not being driven by reaction. You're being driven by reason. When you feel emotions rising, frustration, anger, disappointment, the best thing you can do is breathe and anchor yourself. Remember that this is a conversation, not a confrontation. The person across from you is not your enemy. They're a decision maker. Your job is to influence their decision, not fight their position. If you make it personal, you trigger their defenses. If you keep it professional, you invite collaboration. Calmness disarms tension faster than aggression ever could. Emotions also distort perception. When you're emotionally charged, you tend to exaggerate what's happening. A simple, "we'll have to review this," can feel like rejection. A neutral question can sound like criticism. That distortion can push you into defensive territory where you start explaining, justifying, or even lowering your own ask to feel safe. But when you stay grounded, you hear things as they are, not as your emotions translate them. You respond based on facts, not fears. Another reason professionalism matters is that negotiation often extends beyond that one meeting. People remember how you handled yourself. They remember your tone, your demeanor, your ability to stay composed. If you explode under pressure or show visible frustration, it becomes part of your professional reputation. But if you stay respectful, confident, and strategic, even when you don't get everything you want, you're seen as a person of integrity and maturity. That impression lingers long after the conversation ends. Emotions can also make you say things that weaken your leverage. When you feel cornered, you might blurt out statements like, "I'll accept whatever you think is fair," or "I just really need this job." Those phrases sound harmless, but they communicate surrender. Once you emotionally concede, it's hard to recover your authority. A professional approach, on the other hand, relies on data and calm assertion. You talk in terms of a measurable value based on my contributions and the market range for this role. This figure would reflect fair compensation. It's neutral, factual, and unshakable. The tone of professionalism is neutral but firm. It doesn't beg, it doesn't argue. It persuades through clarity and reason. You're not there to prove your worth emotionally. You're there to demonstrate it logically. Facts are your armor. Data is your shield. Results are your weapon. Emotion only blurs that clarity. The more emotional energy you bring, the less logical structure you maintain. The best negotiators protect that clarity at all costs. It's also important to recognize emotional traps. Sometimes the other side uses them deliberately. They might make statements designed to test your composure, like, "I'm not sure your performance justifies that raise," or "others in your position are earning less." These aren't facts. They're triggers. They're meant to see if you'll react defensively. The moment you do, you give them control of the conversation. The professional response is not to argue, but to redirect. You acknowledge their point and then pivot back to facts. You stay poised, calm, and focused on the outcome rather than the emotion of the moment. When you remove emotion, you create space for strategy. You start thinking several moves ahead instead of reacting to what's right in front of you. You begin to see the negotiation as a structured exchange, not a personal judgment. You ask smarter questions. You identify opportunities. You sense when to press and when to pause. Emotions block those instincts. Professionalism frees them. Negotiation is a test of emotional intelligence as much as skill. Emotional intelligence means being aware of what you feel, but choosing how to express it. It's the discipline to stay balanced when someone tries to unbalance you. It's knowing that every word, every facial expression, every pause communicates something about your inner state. The calmer you appear, the more powerful you seem. People mirror energy. If you bring anxiety, they respond with resistance. If you bring calm, they respond with openness. The hardest part of any negotiation is not controlling the other person. It's controlling yourself. That's where real power comes from. The one who stays composed when things get tense controls the temperature of the room. They don't have to raise their voice to be heard or push their point to be believed. Their professionalism does the talking for them.